agenda,
You bet.
Mr. Lucas.
You got it. There we
Hello,
go.
Brian.
Hey, guys.
So it is 7:01. We'll call the meeting to order. David, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Quish,
Present.
Mr. Mortimer,
I am present.
Mr. Sadie,
Present.
Mr. Collegian,
Present.
Mr. Hirsch. Mr. Hirsch is not present at the moment. Mr. Griffith and Mr. Harris. They're both here.
Here too. You can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm driving. So.
Okay. And Steve Harris is here, and Dave Salkus is here.
Great. Okay. So first order of business, if you would please, David, put up 23-3 proposed changes to Article 5 flood hazard and flood damage prevention, section 5.8.4.9.
Yeah. And there we go. First one is 23-3, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
So if we go to the end, David, and we have the reason, what is the reason that, and again, this is not the subcommittee pushing this forward, this is staff pushing this forward. This was not a member of the subcommittee asking us to do a dive on this.
Right. This regulation change is proposed by the Milford DPLU. It's increasing the design flood elevation. It's previously made homes that have been elevated to be in compliance prior to October 29th, 2019 is out of compliance. Without the revisions, these homes would be required to be re-elevated an additional foot compliance. So basically, this is being written so that homes that were in compliance prior to October of 2019 wouldn't have to become wouldn't fall out of compliance with a change in the design flood elevation.
Right, but so why isn't this automatically legal non-conforming? Because it was conforming before we raised the design flood elevation to a foot higher.
I would have to defer that to our flood plain manager.
Administrator, if you will. But
I'm sorry. Administrator. Manager. Right. Joe.
It's primarily driven because this links back into what the building code requires. And so the building code is requiring houses that whatever the design flood elevation is, be it +1 or +2, houses when they're being analyzed for substantial improvement, the building code's requiring us to look at whatever the design flood elevation is. And so that's where we need to make that distinction. And I know I'm not saying this very clearly, but we need to make the distinction because the building code is looking to the zoning regulations for the design flood elevation. And what's happening is the building code.
Let me just ask a question. If we don't do this, someone who raised their house 5 years ago and was in compliance, but now needs or wants to do a substantial renovation, they would then have to raise up 1 more foot.
Yes.
If we didn't do this.
Correct.
So we're protecting somebody, or maybe many people, from whether it's from another flood or whether it is just they desire to do some additional renovation from needing to raise the house that extra foot, or it is just 1 foot, right? That it would be from the dates.
Yes, we'd see that it would be distinguishing between that last foot. If you were at elevation 14 in 2019, and you came in and you were in a flood zone of elevation 13, 5 years ago, you would have been compliant. You come in today, we look at the regulations, you're not 2 feet above the flood elevation, therefore you're not in compliance. And we would then, by building code, have to review you for whether or not you're substantially improving your house. And if you were, you would be required to elevate it that additional foot.
Okay.
And can I ask some questions? Hey, Joe, does this,
Yes.
would this apply to people whose homes at one point were compliant but weren't required to raise their houses at all? And now they would be exempt from having to raise their houses because of the date? You know, so it's basically saying, you know, I guess that's the question. You fill in the blank. For all structures with the building for which building or substantial improvements permit. That's the key. The permits had to be issued before 2019. So if you didn't have one, then it doesn't matter. You'd have to elevate it to whatever the standard is today.
Right. To today's standard, yes.
So how
My instinct is that this is not an added burden, it's a protection. Is
Yes.
that?
It's taking the burden off of those people who, you know, typically between, 1990 and 2019 elevated their house to bring it into compliance at that time. And, just by, and I mean, again, if the flood maps change, then sorry, they're still, they're out of luck. If the flood maps raise the flood elevation 2 more feet, that doesn't matter. All we're doing is safeguarding them between the time of, they had a design flood elevation of +1 foot. They complied with that. We're just making sure we don't take them out of compliance.
Yeah, I think this is good work as far as I'm concerned. Anybody else have a thought or comment?
can I ask?
Jim, I have a comment if it's okay.
Yeah, please.
We go to the last page, and I guess it's probably to Joe. I can see where 5849 takes out there's changes, but it says plus an additional 2 feet of freeboard. And then later on it says plus 1 additional foot of freeboard. Would you just explain that a little bit better, Joe? Because it looks like it's very confusing reading it.
Yeah, Joe, he's talking about the difference between the regulation 5.8.4.9 and the definition 11.2.
Okay, so what we did was, rather than have the definition of DFE spell out that you're going to be +2 feet, the change there, and I'm trying to read it while I'm driving, so if I get in an accident, it's your fault. What we did was allow the regulation to dictate whether or not the design flood elevation was prior to this 1 foot or currently 2 feet, or frankly, if the board decides we want to provide additional safeguard measures, you can make it 3 feet if you want. But rather, the point of this is to have the definition just refer you back to the regulation.
Okay. Well, what's confusing to me is it says effective October 29th, the DFE shall be the BFE plus an additional 2 feet of freeboard.
Yes.
So it's 2 feet, an additional
Yes.
2 feet. Then it later on says the next line, for all structures of which building or substantial improvement were issued prior to October 29th, the DFE shall be the BFE plus 1 foot of freeboard. Why would they not?
So Bob, Bob, maybe I can explain it. The way it makes sense to you is that the previous from whatever date, it was the design flood elevation +1 foot. Was that our? Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The original text was that you were allowed to build to the flood elevation +1 foot of freeboard, which would allow for mechanicals or whatever. People lifted their houses or built their houses, brand new houses, based on that regulation. Now, subsequent to that, we changed the regulation, and instead of 1 foot above the flood elevation, it was 2 feet above flood elevation, which would fulfill our definition of design flood elevation. So it was flood elevation +1 at one point. Then we change it to flood elevation +2. Now we have a circumstance where someone who raised it to the old standard, but now wants to do substantial renovation or, yes, basically substantial renovation of over 50% of the value of the structure, they would now be held to raise the extra foot. If we pass this, because they were compliant with the previous elevation, they would be allowed to do the substantial renovation without raising the extra foot because they've pretty much complied with the FEMA originally and still in compliance. Is that accurate, Joe?
Guys, can I interrupt
Yes.
for 1 second?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I'm not speaking for you, Bob, but I think it's I think it's just a language thing in that paragraph and definitions. I think if you just take it's where it says additional 2 feet, either cross out that additional 2 feet and just have it read +2 feet, or add additional after the 1 foot in the very last line. I think that presence of
correct, yes.
additional in one place and not the other, that's what's
exactly.
causing the confusion.
That's
Oh,
a
good thought.
really good point.
Good thought.
So
But with
I
it
mean,
first,
I-
thank
Sorry.
you, Brian, for helping explain it, but yeah.
Does
so if
that-
it's all right with everybody, we would just change the text on this instead of saying specifically in that first line, effective October 29th, 2019, the design flood elevation shall be the base foot elevation plus 1 foot plus 2 feet of freeboard. And then in the last line, same text again, the BFE shall be plus 1 foot of freeboard.
That eliminates the confusion for me.
Yes.
I think that's a good observation, Brian. Thank you.
And for the record, Eitan Hirsch has, I believe, joined us
Hello, Eton.
at 7:13.
Yeah, that was overly redundant. Our
Yeah, we don't need to make the regulations any more confusing than they need to be.
Okay. So, are we okay pushing this to the board for approval to circulate it to the stakeholders with that change?
Sounds
I think that makes it clear.
Eton, we're getting some background noise from you. Just
Yeah, I'm having some problems with my laptop. Is that better?
yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So it looks like you're using one device for the camera and the other device for sound.
Yeah, I'm having issues. Let me log off and try again.
Okay. Because you're there now. But we can't hear you.
I think he's gone again.
No, he's
Maybe trying to sign in.
Yeah, his video is
Oh,
still
the
there.
video's there. Or, yeah, the video's there.
If you have to use the other device, Eitan, it's fine because you sounded fine. Oh, now he's gone.
So basically, this is just to protect the homeowner making a substantial improvement, not having to do 2 feet above the required.
Once they've already done 1 foot in the past.
Right. So they'll build to that standard if they're putting in, say, a new extension, new
Like addition
whatever,
or something.
it would still be 1 foot,
Yeah.
all to that standard. Okay.
On to the next one.
Yeah, do we have without objection to send this down the road?
It's good for me.
I agree.
I'm on board.
Okay, so even without Eton's participation, we're good with that. We're unanimous here. So
Eton's very reasonable. I'm sure he would have agreed with you.
yes, I believe you're right. And to move things along, if he has questions or comments later, we can. Let's definitely listen to him. But
Yeah,
So
I thought the definitions, I looked at it beforehand, the definitions were fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So what's our next order of business, Mr. Sulkis?
It is Amendment 23-5. The proposed changes to the City of Milford flood regulations, Article 5, flood hazard, flood damage prevention, Section 5813-4. And let's see here we go. It is some really sort of adjustments to the language to make it more consistent. And let's go to the explanation. And we didn't write anything because if you look at the proposed text, you'll just see some words being swapped out. So under 5.8.13.4, elevated buildings, new construction or substantial improvements of elevated buildings that include fully enclosed areas formed by foundation or other exterior walls below it was base flood elevation. It is now design flood elevation to keep it consistent with the rest of the regulations. Be designed to provide parking, storage, and access to the building, and to preclude finished living space and prohibited habitable floor area, and designated to allow entry and exit flood waters to automatically equalize hydrostatic flood forces.
So good.
My issue is when you remove the word base and you put in design, I know because I live in an AE flood zone. Base flood elevation is used by insurance companies. So you're changing words that have effect for people to be insured potentially.
Okay.
That's a term of insurance art.
Yeah. So
Base flood elevation.
So in this particular case, we use the term design flood elevation in the other parts of the regulation. So we were just making this consistent with that.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that base flood elevation is used by insurance companies to assess risk.
Right.
So the thing is, our design flood elevation is 2 feet above base flood elevation. But personally, I don't like this at all. I think that it's the existing language is fine. If you take out the word base, I'm ambivalent either. Yeah, I don't see that as a problem because we're holding to a higher standard there, but to actually identify what you can do and what you can't do is, to me, intrusive. And the existing language already says it at one thing. Parking of what? Bicycles? Is bicycles fine? Storage of what? Vintage guitars, vintage wine, and how does that affect or vintage scotch, David? How does that affect the insurance exposure? And this whole thing is about a FEMA flood insurance quotient.
Right.
I personally don't like anything about this.
Jim, I hear you, Jim.
I think we're getting in too much in the nitty gritty here, and I don't think it's of any benefit to any
Can I
individual.
jump in here?
Jump in anytime, please, everybody.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to hear from Mr. Sadi since he lives near the water.
What do you want to hear, Ethan?
Hey, what do you think? Do you think that new construction or substantial improvement should be done in a manner to preclude finished living space below the design flood elevation?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
I can have the court reporter read it back.
No, just you were breaking up.
Oh.
When I
My question is somebody who lives near. I live in a flood zone because I'm in a unique situation on Burnt Plains. But if you live near the water, should new construction or when you make substantial improvements to a property, when those events occur, should somebody be precluded or a homeowner be precluded from building below the base flood elevation?
Well, I think it's just, I won't interject. Sorry.
I don't have I have to think that thing through. I'm just looking at 5.8.13.4. I've not done a deep dive into all the other regulations. I can tell you that.
I mean, if you take out the language that's being changed, I just think I don't know. If you
I'm
take it
always in
out,
favor
you're saying to preclude finished living space and designed to allow for entry and exit of floodwaters. I think that's sufficient. I think the existing language is sufficient.
That's already the case as far as
So the existing language is sufficient. Now, if somebody comes up with some use of that space that's not specifically identified here, they're not in compliance with the zoning regulations. If I think it's enough to say it precludes finished living space and designed to allow for the entry and exit of floodwaters.
yeah.
I think it's sufficient the way it is, personally.
Can I jump in?
I was going to
Jim, could I
say,
jump?
oh, sure, Joe, hop on in.
No, I mean, I guess that's fine. I mean, the whole point of this regulation amendment was to correct the change that we didn't make before when it should have been design flood elevation instead of base flood elevation. The only reason for adding that additional language is it does very literally take what is in the building code and stick it in the regulations. Again, it won't change anything. We're still going to have to enforce the building code, which says specifically you can only provide parking, storage, and access to the building to the living space above.
Right.
So again, that's fine. If the board is more comfortable striking out the additional language that's in bold and italics, that's okay.
So then at that point, the only thing that we were doing is cleaning up the language to make design flood elevation consistent throughout our regs.
Right. So we would keep the word design and strike the other language out.
If I may ask, that other language, is that, just to be clear, that is language to provide parking, storage, and access to the building. Is that language from the Connecticut Building Code?
Yes.
Oh.
So
it already applies.
So this is redundant then. If it's already there, it's redundant.
Yeah.
And does it say and prohibit habitable floor area? Is that?
Yes.
What it does there is, if you are building a new house and you aren't familiar with zoning or building codes, it's one extra place for someone to find the information, whether they're an architect or a designer or the homeowner when looking at the regulations, when they ask, how come we have to elevate our house? And then they see, oh, we have to elevate it. And, oh, there are limits to what we can do with that space underneath. So they could, in theory, be finding out that information earlier in the process instead of being surprised about it later when they're getting their building permit or they're in the design phase of, having their house designed and saying, oh, yeah, we want this and want that. And, their designer may or may not know that that's the case, or may not care early on because, well, you're just applying for your building, your zoning permit at that time. And
I mean, I think personally, I think that's the building department will look at your drawings and say, no, you can't have a game room down there. And if somebody's kids goes down and plays hopscotch in their garage that's under the flood elevation, they're now in violation of a zoning reg, specifically by the language. I don't know. I just don't like it. It's up to if the board wants to push this forward to the full board, to the committee wants to push it forward. That's fine. I won't.
Well, I had this exact
like
circumstance come up when my house was built, and we were told right off the bat, you can't have any mechanicals, you can't have anything for the 12 feet. So it's already on the books, and it is redundant in my opinion. I don't feel strongly that it needs to be there or not, but it was common knowledge for the architect.
Yeah, I think everybody knows.
I think if you're building a house in an AE flood zone, you kind of know you can't put the mechanicals below base flood elevation. I think this is known at this point, but again, David, Mr. Sulkus makes a great point, which is, it's redundant. So then again, all you're doing is making the regulations in compliance with the Connecticut Building Code. I think that's fine. It's a prophylactic measure. I just see no problem with it.
As long as we don't add another burden onto the homeowner, I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
I'm okay with it.
Somebody comes in and says, "What's habitable floor area?" And it becomes discretionary. It becomes potentially, I don't know. If anybody wants to, if everyone else wants to push it through, or majority wants to push it through, that's fine by me. I don't like it. I would prefer we don't. I prefer we leave it as it is and just change from base design to design, because that's consistent through the language of our whole flood regs.
Can I ask a question either to Mr. Griffith or Mr. Sulkus, whoever could answer this? Where's the term prohibit? What is habitable floor area? Is that somewhere else in our regulations or a code?
Habitable floor, I know
Break it up there.
building code. I don't know specifically whether we've got habitable floor. Stephen, do you know about habitable floor in our zoning regulations?
I don't recall ever reading habitable floor area, just living space.
Okay, so our zoning regulations do define habitable floor.
Okay.
They say any floor usable for living purposes, which includes working, sleeping, eating, cooking, or recreation, or a combination thereof. A floor used for commercial and or industrial storage purposes is not a habitable floor.
And that's commercial, not residential.
That's correct. Commercial or industrial storage purposes is not habitable, because we have some commercial things that are in flood zones. And Joe, you broke up when you were giving your answer about habitable floors in the building code. So if you can repeat what
Can you hear me okay?
You still break it up there, Joe.
Yeah, you sound like you're underwater.
Okay. Wait, let me come to the surface.
Well, that's better.
No, the habitable floor is out of the building code, and as Stephen, or as you just said, habitable floor is also defined in the zoning regulations.
Okay, so it's both places.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure we have total consensus, so we can have a motion and a discussion and vote on whether to put this forward to the whole board for their consideration.
Want me to take the roll? Or do you want to do it by hand?
We have to have a motion first. Someone's got to make the motion.
Dick Wish, I'll make the motion to send this proposed text regulation change to the full board.
Yeah, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I'm a little unclear based on the language. I don't think it's been fully explained as to what is the difference between preclude finished living space and prohibit habitable floor area. Are those two separate concepts? Precluding finished living space and prohibiting habitable floor area. What's the difference?
We
Good
currently
point.
have,
Seems to be the same thing.
yeah, we currently have in the language right now is preclude finished living space. That's what exists in the regulation right now.
But what is the difference between finished living space and habitable floor area?
That's a good point.
Concepts?
That's clearly redundant.
I'm not understanding. That's why I'm a little unclear why we're going to give inconsistent language to the full board. And I understand the motion. I get that, but I'm going to raise it. I mean, I'll vote for it to bring to the board, but I'm going to raise the same issue when we're in front of the whole board.
Well, I'm going to vote against sending it to the board because I don't like any bit of it myself. So now you have a choice to send it or not send it. Or we could, we have a motion now. We could have another. We could adjust a motion to change some of the language. Those are our options as they exist right now.
Yeah, it seems to be completely redundant to me. I don't think we need any of those any of that new language.
Okay. Well, any other discussion on the motion before we vote? David, if you would call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Mortimer.
I'm against the motion.
Mr. Quish.
I'm against the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
I'm against the motion.
Okay, Mr. Collegian.
Against the motion.
Against the motion, and Mr. Hirsch.
I'm against the motion.
Okay.
Okay, so we can, we'll move on from this. We can bring up changing base and design. I don't want to do it again here, but unless anyone else does, we can have a motion to just take the word
Design. Change the word base.
Yeah, take out base and add design, which does make it consistent with the rest of the language we use in our flood zones. Do we have a motion to do just that piece that does not add an additional burden to homeowners?
I'll make a motion to strike all the new language except for design flood elevation instead of base flood elevation.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion? If not, David, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Mortimer.
For the motion.
For the motion. Mr. Quish.
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
I'm with the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
And Mr. Hirsch.
With the motion.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Moving right along.
Give me 2 seconds here to find the next one. 3, 5, 8. Okay, share this. 1. There, 1. Where is there? 1? Yes. Okay. So, let's see here. This is Amendment 23-8 which is the changes to the approval of location, section 9.2.4. The existing regulation refers to the Planning and Zoning Board. Let's see. Yeah. The Planning and Zoning Board approving the approval of location. Over the years, it's gone back and forth by statute between the Planning and Zoning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals. And finally, what the state legislature has done is they've gotten rid of it from both boards, and so it doesn't have to go to a board anymore, but it now gets approved by the zoning enforcement officer. So the proposed language to actually remove section 9.2.4, since it would get removed, and then put into a section 5.4.1.1, the approval of location of vehicle dealerships and repair facilities. The zoning enforcement officer, acting as an agent of the state and in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes 14-54, amended effective 7/1/23, shall have the authority to approve the location of motor vehicle dealership and motor vehicle repair facility license applications, and to issue a certificate of approval of location after affirming such location conforms to the zoning regulations. And that language, I believe, comes directly out of the statutes. Stephen?
It does.
Yep.
So now if somebody just has an issue, said, oh, you approved this and it shouldn't have been approved, all they do is go to the ZBA for adjudication. Is that right?
Well,
Yeah.
back in the immediate olden days, a dealership, say Subaru and Genesis, as a matter of fact, both went to the ZBA for an administrative approval of location. Even though they had special permits and so forth, the use was allowed in the zone. So this just eliminates that unnecessary trip and cost associated with going to a board to get the same approval. It just shifts that burden over to me.
Right. So it's your obligation to just identify yes or no if it is permitted in the zone, and then if it's not, then you send it to special permit, or I mean, it has to be permitted by language. It can't be permitted by special permit without going to the board. Is that correct?
Yes, this whole thing about approval of location is an extra step. So even if a dealership is allowed by right in a zone, one would still have to go to the zoning board of appeals and have them say, yes, we approve this location,
Right.
even though the zoning regulations say the exact same thing.
I was just gonna say, let me just spin this just a little different into a real life situation, which is the typical situation. The typical situation, Jim, is an applicant comes to us for a new dealership, say, Subaru or Genesis. They go through our process and our board approves them. Sometimes they forget that they needed to go and get that approval of location, and they go after the fact, but before they get their certificate of zoning compliance or certificate of occupancy. So it gets done, but it gets done out of sync, or it gets done later. So what the legislature, in its wisdom, in this particular case, you basically our board is still going to approve the plans or not approve the plans, but when they come in for their zoning permit, they're going to be coming in and getting the permit from the same guy who also can give them their certificate of approval of location, which the zoning enforcement officer will do because the planning and zoning board approved their plans.
So it's eliminating a redundancy on the front end, and the state has asked us to do this, and we're just complying.
Yep.
Is there anybody else that reads this any differently?
Mr. Quish, I got a bigger problem. It's not the reading. This was never noticed as being on the agenda. with a link to any documents. And I know that before the meeting started, I let Mr. Sulkus know I've never seen these documents. I don't know where they came from. And certainly the public, I went right to the planning and zoning website. You have no ability to see this, and it refers to section 9.2.4.
Well-
I never seen this document, and I'm not faulting anybody, but materials are sent to us, and we should be able to see them. And I can tell you, I'm looking at the website. It doesn't give you a link to this, and it refers to a completely different section of the zoning regs.
So this, again, is a subcommittee meeting of, the Planning and Zoning Board. And as such, you can create or not create something, whether it's on the agenda or not, but it was listed on the agenda. It just didn't have any of the documents because they weren't ready at the time. This subcommittee is not the subcommittee that approves the regulation. The subcommittee, the best you can do is look at the language. If you look at the concept, if you like it, great, we can move on to the full board. Or if you don't like it, it doesn't move on. But if it moves on, that's when it gets its public hearing, and that's when the public has the opportunity to review it and discuss it.
Yeah, so let's see if we can, going forward, make sure that the links are active, so that if a member of the subcommittee wants to read it in advance or think
Yes.
about stuff, make sure that happens in every case, so that
And it's my fault because it was sent to me yesterday, and I've been very busy the last few days working on some reports for your next meeting, and I didn't have a chance to see it. And so I take full responsibility for you not seeing it earlier. I saw it this evening myself for the first time.
And Dave, Robert, if you would prefer to wait on this, or just use the time between now and the full board looking at it to review the language, I'll defer to any member if they want more time.
I don't need to. If there's a motion, I'll listen to the motion and I'll let you know my position on it.
Okay. Okay, well, we can, if we want to have a motion, or we want to go without objection, we'll have a motion. Unless there's we'll have a motion and further discussion. So if we could have a motion to approve, then we can discuss it further with a second.
Okay, I move to approve as presented the proposed text, 5.4.1.1.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Any further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, the language, if you go back to the proposed text, I think there might just be a minor error, which is the language. Can you go scroll down a little bit? The language indicates amended effective 7/1/23, but then reason for change says it's effective July 30th. So what is the date of the effective change? Is it supposed to be 8/1/23?
No, it's 7/1.
But the
I double
Public Act
checked
is
it.
effective July 30th.
I double checked the Public Act before I wrote that.
All right, just double checking. Okay.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, then we can call the roll.
Okay, Mr. Mortimer,
For the motion.
Mr. Quish,
I'm with the motion.
Mr. Sadi.
I'll be abstaining from the motion.
Okay. Mr. Collegian,
The motion,
I didn't get the first, is it you with the motion?
with the motion, I'm sorry.
Mr. Hirsch?
With the motion.
Okay,
And before the acceptance, I'll withdraw my abstention. I'll be with the motion. So it's
okay,
unanimous.
Thank you.
okay.
And just as a housekeeping note, let's make sure that we have, every member has a little bit of time to look at stuff in advance, and if for some reason there's an inability to get that done, let's allow some leeway for individual members to ask for additional time, put it to the next meeting, or whatever they feel is relevant to that particular issue and how much information they want to consider.
No problem. Okay, so the next proposed amendment is 23-11.
I'm just going to step away for 30 seconds. I'll be right back. I apologize.
We can wait the 30 seconds.
Can we talk about him behind his back while he's not here?
I'm going to take advantage and step away as well.
By the way, Mr. Setti, I met your brother the other day.
Thank you.
He's a lawyer. He's at Halloran and Sage now, and he was very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, he was very nice.
Darn trick-or-treaters, they come every night.
Well, now we're just waiting for John to return. I hear footsteps. Okay, so this proposed change is to add a new definition of dormer and substantial improvement. And the wording is, dormer, it's redefining it as a roof structure located on and not exceeding the height of a pitched roof, a height of, a pitched roof, under which the cumulative floor area, the dormer or multiple dormers, does not exceed 35% of the total floor area or areas enclosed by the exterior walls immediately below. And then substantial improvement related to this, any repair, any substantial improvement, any repair, reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or improvement of a building or structure located in a special flood hazard area or floodplain, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the building or structure before the improvement or repair is started.
Now, I have one question here. What is the look back? So if you do, and again, if it's not stated here, a look back exists, right? So if you did a repair or a improvement 2 years ago, you're going to include that in the arithmetic that gets to that 50% of the market value of the structure in terms of calculating the value of the improvements.
Can I jump in?
Jump in, Joe.
Okay. So yes, Jim, that's correct. Within our regulations, we have provisions that our look back, as you say, is over a 5-year period. I think at one point it was 10 years. The board then changed it back to a 5-year period. So yes, that's the whole idea of making sure it's clear here that the review of the value of the work is going to be within that 5-year period.
But so then that language should be in every one of these sections.
Well, that language is in section 5.8, the floodplain regulations.
Yeah, because what these are, Jim, these are going into the definition section of the book.
Okay, and again, we'll address this in this committee. Is that I think that there's a problem there. If you have 3 years ago needed windows replaced because they're old, and you do that, or you have an ailing roof and you do that, and you have things that are not considered an addition and they're considered general maintenance of a house. If you did a kitchen renovation 4 years ago and now you're doing an addition or a dormer, I think that we have to we have to revisit.
God damn it.
So I think that is, I think the way it is right now is a burden on just general maintenance, and then and then it's just unclear. Like if somebody put new windows and a new roof and whatever else improvements they did, then they sold their house, and the next person wants to do a different renovation. Does that 5 years travel with the land, or is it with the owner? So I think it's unclear as it stands now, and it should be addressed on a separate issue. But the 35%, what is the thinking behind that? Can anybody sort of give me
Yes,
something there that makes some common sense?
Stephen. You have to unmute.
All right. We had reached a situation where people would build a house, let's say 60 feet long, and then they would put on a shed dormer that's 40 feet long or 50 feet long, effectively changing the pitch of the house, but saying, well, it's not to the midpoint of my gable, that's just a dormer. So we had an informal policy where we would consider 50%. We call it the 50% rule. So your shed dormer could be no more than half the length of the house without it counting towards building height. Because the midpoint between the dormer eave and ridge is different than the gable. So this just changes it down to 35%.
It defines the dormer.
It's to stop people from doing an end around the regulations and building houses that are effectively higher than 35 feet.
Well, so you have a house that was built, and you're halfway between the ridge and the
Because normally
the eaves, they're at 35 feet. Now, if they put a dormer in, then why don't we just change the calculation to the pitch of the dormer, or whichever is less? I mean, I just, and again, I know you folks know more than I do about this in general, but it's just, for me, anytime I see something that looks like handcuffs, it's just antithetical to serving the individual, whatever somebody wants to do something. Are they really, is this going to affect one person who's doing an end around and hurt 20 people that are just trying to do something cool for their own lives? I mean,
there's an awful lot of workarounds. The zoning regulations exclude dormers from the height calculation, but we don't define what a dormer is. Therefore, an open sandbox, because normally in the olden days, a lot of these regulations go back years and years and years. So in the olden days, you said dormers like a doghouse dormer. But nowadays, for a while, people build these shed dormers that are quite substantial. So the regulations say, you measure the height between the midpoint of the gable, the eave and the ridge. People say, okay, but it excludes dormers, so they build these massive dormers, and they effectively raise the height of the house. So this is just an attempt to bring some consistency and sanity back to the house heights. Because if your ridge is 60 feet long and your shed dormer is 50 feet long, right? You've got 5 feet of gable on either end. That's not your roof. It's effectively that long dormer. So this tries to just put
Rein that.
put some brakes on that sort of runaway end around the regulations.
Yeah, but so then why wouldn't it say that if there is a dormer, then a dormer at 35% or whatever percent of the length of the house, that becomes the new calculation?
No, a dormer at 35% is just a dormer. If a dormer at 36% would be the new height measurement.
Which would turn out to be higher than the average of what we allow now. That's the issue. Because
But our rule of thumb has been letting it go at 50%.
Yeah.
Why don't we just stay with 50%?
Yes,
It wasn't 50% of the area, it was 50% of the ridge line. And what was happening was you were getting these people putting on these shed dormers, and the front wall, the window wall, if you will, of the shed dormer would come right out to the exterior wall. So you'd literally be standing there looking up at 40 feet of wall, from the grade up to the gutter of this, because this dormer extended out so far.
I mean, you could just say that the knee wall of the dormer cannot exceed the height of the 50% of the original calculation between the eave and the ridge. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that's a good thought. I just verbalized it anyway.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on this trying to figure out how to do it, keeping in mind during our staff discussions the creative ways that people have presented dormers under the current regulations and roof lines and things, and it was felt that this was actually the clearest and easiest to understand and be able to measure. Because it's not the things that you mentioned, Jim, is not always apparent in their drawings and their designs, or even present.
Yeah,
and keep in mind, it's not restricting the number of dormers or the area of dormers on a roof, other than when those dormers start exceeding the 35-foot height limitation. That's the only time it becomes an issue.
So yeah, and so 35% of the total floor area is habitable. The good word that we like to use now, livable area. With is it just anything under roof? So that's unclear, right? If you have a if you have a very steep roof dormer, only a portion of that, maybe 20 or 30%, is habitable area because it's less than 7 or 6'7" or whatever the height restrictions would be.
And again, the objective would be to, again, just define whether or not that structure is a dormer or not. It's not to restrict it in any way other than when the height of that dormer exceeds the height of the allowable height of the building.
Well, no, I don't think that's what it says, right? It says that anything, as long as it's talking about floor area.
Right, but this is under the definitions. In the text, under the height exceptions, they talk about, your roof is allowed to be 35-foot high, except, and we're not going to, essentially it says 35-foot high to the midpoint of the roof, and we're not going to count dormers. That's what the regulations say. And so the point being is, at what point do you start or stop counting the dormers? How big can a dormer be and still be considered a dormer? And this is where we're saying we got to put a limit on how big a dormer is before it becomes the roof itself.
And this could be the house of the 7 gables. This could be 7 gable dormers.
Well, and again, if they're all individual roofs like the House of 7 Gables, then we're going to measure to the midpoint. And if it stays below the height limitations, we'll give them a high 5. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's beyond my pay grade, but if the whole board wants to hear it, I wouldn't put my heels in the sand against it. If you guys think it's a good idea, I don't really know.
You know, at some point, a dormer stops being a dormer and it turns into the roof.
Yeah, I get that. I'm trying to visualize, and I know a lot of people have always done the full shed dormers as far as they could go to get a little bit more living space, or usable space. Whatever.
Which on a cape would be fine. Again, that you're not exceeding the height limitations. It's
Yeah,
these occasions where the height of the building is increased by 5 or 6 feet by virtue of the dormer.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm okay with sending it down the road myself.
Mr. Quish,
Yes, sir.
thank you for, I've had mixed feelings about looking at this also. And I really think that we shouldn't send it to the full board now for 2 reasons. The first one is I would like to get more information from whoever's going to provide it to us, but most of us recognize the issue of capes, but can you show us some buildings that would give us an idea? Because it's hard to imagine that. And more importantly, I think the bigger issue is our next item on the agenda is us trying to deal with affordable housing. And I want to make sure whatever we do by definitions, we don't preclude an expansion of property that might affect and maybe assist affordable housing and or ADUs or accessory development of any sort. So I'm in the mode to just kick this down the road a little bit and I like really listen to what we're talking about for the idea of affordable housing.
Okay, that's okay. I think that if you would like to get some further definition or some sketches or something and show the worst case scenarios, you can send that off to David, and David can either direct you to a link somewhere where you can see where an example of what it looks like when these dormers are kind of skirting what we tried to do with our height restrictions in the past. But I don't want to move it forward unless we're comfortable, and without objection, we'll let Mr. Sadie get some more information before dealing with this issue.
Mr. Quish,
Yeah.
we'll put together several graphic examples of what we're trying to address by this.
That would be helpful. Yes. Is that helpful to you, Mr. Sadie?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Picture is worth 1,000 words, some would say.
We'll take care of that.
Why don't you do your closing arguments with pictures then, Mr. Sadie? Okay, so that will be on our next meeting's agenda, given all members, not just Mr. Sadie, some examples of what we have now and what we are allowing that we probably didn't want to allow. Next order of business is item D. Is that correct, Mr. Solkis?
Yes, member suggestions for proposed amendments discuss draft regulations requiring for affordable housing and multifamily projects of varying sizes.
Okay, so I did not write anything up on this, but what I want us to think about and possibly have a public input forum in the subcommittee to discuss an idea of trying to address the Milford's need for affordable housing without automatically needing to acquiesce to 830G applications. So if we get to 10%, or possibly even if we show good progress, we can maybe get another moratorium. But my having done a little bit of research and seeing what other developments and other communities are doing is creating a sliding scale. So we'll take a number and I'll just throw out arbitrary numbers to start with, but say anything over 12 units and under 24 units, you need 10% affordable across every zone that allows residential or mixed use residential. And then from 24 to 48, you need 13% or 14%. And anything over 48 to 100, you need 20%. So what we're doing is trying to find a way to increase the affordable housing stock in Milford without allowing for someone to go in and find one house on 1 acre and putting up 14 units. That really does disturb the culture and or the, you know, the feel of the neighborhood. It just really does. And that's what we've been fighting for. I don't think Milford's ever really been against affordable housing, but pretty adamantly against having neighborhoods culture changed from to have multi units in a single family zone. So I would open this up to any discussion or any thoughts anybody has.
Well, what comes to mind to me is we've approved the Milford Post project. We couldn't get them to move off of 10%. So I don't know about putting a language in there to make it 20% or whatever.
To further the discussion, we could invite to maybe the next subcommittee meeting where this comes up, David Fink, and I know that Bob knows David. He's the consultant on housing that the Council of Governments is using. And his son, I think, is part of that contract. Is a I'm not sure how you describe him. He's a facilitator, I guess, who has gone to various communities to discuss these issues. And I think I agree with you, Jim. What you're talking about is done in other communities. So doing that, coming up with regulations to do that here is probably a good idea and doable. But perhaps starting the discussion with a housing expert from the Council of Governments may be helpful. But that's your call.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, whatever the affordable housing plan that was put forth didn't really help us much in terms of getting us continuation of the moratorium. And it's a document that it is what it is. We approved it. Yeah, we read it. And did we have an opportunity to really participate? I don't think we did. So the existing affordable housing plan didn't really move us forward. And I think this subcommittee has to move us forward. I think that's the message I got from all the POCD conversations, is that there's no teeth. So here's where we have the teeth. So we can propose our own regulations for anything we want.
Yep.
Now, they don't always have to get passed by the whole board, and they don't have to all pass the scrutiny of the public in a public hearing, but then we hear it and then we vote on it. And if it's a good idea, it probably will pass. If it's not, it probably won't. But I think here's where we have individually an opportunity to put forth things that are important to us. And I think this one is obviously been contentious and important to the community. So I'm happy to either have our own think tank between us, or, as David suggests, bring someone in from the Regional Council of Governments who probably will pay for it, right?
No, it's free.
Oh, well, we don't have to pay for it, so that's good.
Well, we pay for it through our membership dues to the Council of Governments.
Gotcha. But I think that should be, two things I'd like for takeaways is that I think we should do this. And number two, I think if individually we have something we feel is important to change in Milford, that, this is where the rubber meets the road. POCD, we put a lot of effort in, but it's advisory. Here we can actually affect change. So I would encourage everyone to reach into their own passions, and I'm open to anything that people feel that we can do something better for the city. So without objection, I would say let's, on our next meeting, have somebody that the regional council will send to us to discuss the opportunities and what success stories they found for addressing affordability in housing in their own communities. You know, whether it's my idea of a gradated or not gradated, but a tiered system of percentages or something else. You know, I don't know. I'm open, but I would rather have us decide than somebody find a house with an acre and a half and put 20 units on it. So
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you, Jim. I'm just pointing out that we didn't get it done before, but I would like to see more movement in that area for sure. We need to get it done.
Yeah, keep in mind, whatever it is you do, and I obviously support everything that you're doing, and your thoughts on this. Just keep in mind that whatever regulations we come up with, and however they're implemented, until the city reaches 10% affordability of its entire housing stock, you're still going to get 830G applications coming in.
yeah,
So-
yeah. No, I think that's an
So-
important thing to think about. You know, if we have a 10%, all we're doing is treading water, you know.
Yeah.
But if we do 10% on smaller things, and you know, if somebody can help us out, and I think we should probably invite some of the developers to say, you know, what is the number? Where does it pencil? Is it 12% and you're still okay? Is it 12% with a tax credit? Is it 12% with we underpin some, you know, sustainability improvements? Who knows? You know, it's probably not just a one broad brush solution, and it's okay if it's complicated. It's sometimes if it's worth doing, it's worth working on. So, but I appreciate what you're saying, David. Is that it's a lot of units, especially when all of a sudden we approve 500 units in the last 2 years of market rate. That puts us 500 units behind. Just us. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I would I'm in favor of having a consultant or whoever comes into the next meeting, but I think a healthy way to look at 830G is to just read the regulation again, look at the shift of the burden of proof, and just assume that we're never going to hit the moratorium again, because we're not. But I think that's the healthiest way to look at it. And I agree with that. We should try and try and try, but read the statute, read the burden of proof, and just when you look at that, just remember, we're not going to do that again. We had some hocus pocus and we got there once. It's designed to fail. They designed it so you couldn't get there.
Well,
So,
you know, I think
but
that's a good point.
let's have the consultant come in by all means. I mean, let's hear it. But I think the way you just don't think that you're going to overcome 830G by throwing some stuff at them, because you're not.
You're not until you hit that percent. You're right. One thing I agree with you 100%, Brian. One thing I thought about was when we have this next public comment period on the next meeting with regard to Shell Street, is that I want to have David's staff print up 30 or 40 copies of the 830G regulation and have it in a pile out in the lobby, and big signs saying, read this before you start talking about what you don't like, you know, because they don't understand. You know what it is. They just don't. I mean, Christ, we don't even fully, or at least me, I don't fully understand it. I mean, I get the concept, but you know, this concept of what is and what is not a health risk. You know, I found out that, you know, emotional health in the community doesn't mean shit to a tree. I found that out. But anyway, so I hear you, Brian. I think you're exactly right. But I think if, you know, all of a sudden, if 3 or 4 years go down the road when we have some major developments and they do put in 15, 20%, even if it's not 830G, but we give them something, you know, there's a carrot somewhere, whether it's a tax abatement or a little bit more density than a zone would have allowed, then it pencils for them and they make money and they're happy to do it if they're making money.
I think it's good to have a goal.
You nailed it, Jim. It's about the dollars, and I don't know if your thoughts or proposals about graduated increase of as you go up in units, getting more affordable housing is going to lead to more money for the developer. If the developer doesn't think they're going to get more money on it, but there are ways of massaging the tax structures to incentivize. But I don't know if that's within our purview to be able to do that.
Well, I think we can bring it up to the aldermen. I think it's theirs, but if we come up with a plan and say, look, it's a collective issue, whether you're on this board or that board, we all care about it. And we can, just say, this is what we propose. This is what we think's important. It's good for the city. And, I think in a small town like Milford with a big heart, there's a lot of people that are looking for the best interest of everybody,
Yeah.
So,
especially
Mr.
a lot of these people have neighborhoods that have sort of been, infringed upon. So they'll be more adamant to prevent it in the future too. So anyway, they may even have better ideas than all of us. We may all have some good ideas. I know I don't have them all. I just have a general instinct that says, let's try to solve it. And if we get some consultants, and then we'll get maybe another meeting with some of the developers and there's a lot of smart people out there in the community that may have some deeper depth and understanding than I do, and maybe any of us does. So I'm okay with listening to them for sure.
Mr.
But
Quish,
if anybody doesn't have anything else they want to add, then
Mr. Quish?
We've done. Yes, please.
Thank you. So last week, and I want to give this report to the subcommittee. I went on a bus tour and went to two places in Wallingford, two places in Milford, dealing with mixed income housing, which would include affordable housing. The two ones in Milford were 830G, opposed by the municipality, and they were then upheld by the court. The ones in Wallingford, which are very interesting, were agreed to. They didn't go 830G. They were pretty much what we're talking about. The builders came in. They had one was 36 units, so it's attached. I think it was a total of 4 buildings, and it's attached with garage and like, which we can see from time to time. But the point is that the contractor there and the developer, worked with the city to get the numbers. It was not in a regulation. Second one, which was very interesting that I had not seen before, was basically individual houses. And they came up with a term that I'd never heard before, and I forgot the name of it. But the point is that, say there was 30 houses in one section of it, 4 or 5 or 3, whatever the number would be affordable housing. And it's not a condominium, but they're actually separate. And it was a pretty interesting concept. It was built in 3 levels. It was built up a hill right near Oakdale. So if you want to just go near Oakdale, you can look it up. The point I'm trying to address to everybody is that Brian, I think your comment is spot on, and we're trying to work the best way. But I think that also, as others have mentioned, we have to get the developers involved in this. And again, there may or may not be tax breaks, but the point is, it's being done in other communities near us. We should reach out and find out, get as much information. And I think David Sulkus's suggestion to get Mr. Fink in is very helpful, because he seems to be an amazing amount of knowledge on it. We were supposed to go one other place in New Haven. We just ran out of time. I would have liked to see how New Haven is dealing with it, what they're doing, but that's one thing. And just to talk about the other part of this, I think that we really should be considering the ADUs. And the question is now, do we have enough information to have them detached? And I know that we didn't agree to have them detached, but I think it's just something we should at least keep open. And we may decide again that it should be not detached from the original property. But those are things that I'm just pointing out. I think the affordable housing is there. I think the chairman's idea to get a public hearing and listen to the constituents and what they're looking to do. And also, I think that the chair has got a very good point that many people don't understand what 830G means. And I can tell you that the one stop we had in Milford is the Muse on Wheelers Farm Road. And the developer was talking about it and indicated that it had to go through litigation, and the judge up there, gave them what they wanted. So, I mean, we have to make that decision. So just my thoughts on the matter, but thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Good. All good stuff. I think we lost David.
Oh, I should be there.
Oh, no, here we are.
Yeah,
Something happened.
Yeah,
Went
there
black
was,
for a minute there.
yeah, there was a little glitch on my end. I hit a chord.
Well, was it a B sharp?
No, if anything, it was a B flat.
Or a C flat? That's an enigma. They don't exist. Anyway,
That's
thank
true.
you all. And
Approval of minutes, Mr. Chair.
say what?
The approval of minutes.
Go ahead.
No, there's on the agenda, the approval of minutes.
Yes, there is. You're right. So next item of business is the approval of minutes. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
We have a second.
Second.
Without objection,
So
Minutes
Sadi
are
will
approved.
abstain.
Mr. Sadie's abstained. Without objection, with one abstention, minutes are approved. Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Sadi will make said motion.
Thank you all for your efforts and time, and we will see you soon.
Next week.
Yes, after the election, what's going to happen?
Nobody knows.
So
Stay
now.
tuned.